Well, good morning or good afternoon or good evening, whenever you might be listening to this. My name is Karen Eifler. I serve as director of Collegium, and this is one of our series of occasional Collegium booster shot conversations with friends of Collegium, alums of Collegium who are out in the field taking some of the lessons of Collegium home to their teaching, scholarship, and service. Some of you might remember a conversation we had last fall with physical chemist Stephen Mayer, who talked to us about adapting Lectio Divina into something that he calls Lectio Entropio, which is a strategy that he uses, adapting Lectio Divina into his physical chemistry classroom to help teach his upper division chemistry students some really complex vocabulary and concepts in physical chemistry, and that was really well received, and that made me especially attentive to the role of Lectio Divina out there. And today we are talking with Professor of Social Work Liz Keenan. Liz is a longtime friend of Collegium, a one-time mentor in a small group, and she's currently Professor of Social Work at Southern Connecticut State University. Liz uses Lectio Divina herself to prepare herself to teach in the demanding field of social work. It's not a tool that she uses with her students. She actually uses it for her students to get herself ready. And I thought it would be really interesting to walk us through that. So thank you, Liz, and welcome.
Well, thank you, Karen. It's great
Yeah.
to be here.
Yeah, many listeners might have some familiarity with Lectio Divina, but for those for whom the concept is new or maybe a little bit foggy, how would you describe Lectio Divina?
Yeah, I would say that Lectio is a way of listening to sacred texts as if one was in a conversation with God. So for me, it's an opportunity to really have a focused pause and reflection on some aspect from Scripture. And it has a few steps. So the Lectio is the first step of selecting a text and then engaging in a reading of it, of sitting with it. And during that reading, of really tuning in and listening to a phrase or a word or an image that might jump out or might get my attention or might have me say, oh, I hadn't heard that before. The next step is reflexio, reflection. And in that step, it's really an invitation to sit with and to think about what is God saying, what is God speaking and saying here in this text, in terms of the people in that text itself, but also to me as a person, as a professor. That then leads to the next step, oratio or prayer. And it's my response. How am I responding to what I've been hearing and reflecting on? Many times, my response initially is, what is it that you want me to see or hear or know, God? What, what, what are you saying to me right now? And so I'll start with that open-ended question and then see where it takes me. And
Mhm.
then the final part is contemplatio or contemplation. And that can be just a brief moment of just sitting with and being with God in God's presence as a way of wrapping it up and taking an intention forward.
Okay, thank you. You wrapped up an ancient practice admirably succinctly. And that can be really tough to do. Liz, one of the things that really intrigues me about the way you have adapted the practice of Lectio into your teaching is that you engage in Lectio prior to your teaching. Could you walk us through what that looks like and mention how long a typical prep session might last?
Well, what I found is, given the unpredictability of a day, the length will vary
Mhm.
depending upon what space I have. But I do put in my calendar at least 15 minutes somewhere in the day, and hopefully within an hour or two of when I am moving into a classroom to help me get ready.
Mhm.
And so there are times in which I'll do something really more formal. Like I can provide an example. A few weeks ago, one of the Sunday Gospels was from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 7, about Jesus healing the man who was deaf and had a speech impediment. And so I carry on my phone an app that has the Sunday readings, and I opened it back up, even though it was a Thursday, and I reread the text, and I was really struck, I have it right here, by how Jesus was being like besieged by all these people who were needing healing. And Jesus took this man off by himself away from the crowd. And then he put his finger in his ears and he spit and touched his tongue. And it was so visceral. And then it says that Jesus groaned
Mhm.
and he said, Ephatha, be opened.
Mhm.
And then the man was healed. And so for me, in preparing for teaching,
Mhm.
the be opened
Mhm.
really resonated with me in such a visceral being with kind of way. And I'm like, in what ways am I closed to the fullness of the students that I'm going to go interact with? Have I
Mhm.
gotten annoyed or irritated because they didn't turn something in on time?
Mhm.
Or, have I brought a bias because of how they might be dressed or how they were acting in a previous class? And so I try to think about in what ways, God, are you asking me to be opened to the fullness of who the students are? And that's one of the ways that I try and bring a receptivity. Can I really see the students as human beings, as fully human,
Mhm.
um, as well as ticking off the boxes of what do I need to bring to class and what technology do I have to get set up and those kinds of things. But just really try to start with who they are as people.
All people want to be seen and heard, right, for who they are and treasured. So you typically use sacred texts for your own personal prep before you move into the classroom. I also get the sense that there are times when you're able to use at least some of what you are steeped in your practice of Lectio to read the class itself, the people who are there as sacred text. Am I getting that right? Is that
Yes.
that happened? Could you talk a little bit about how that might unfold in a classroom in sort of practical terms?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it really is the flow of the steps. And so at the beginning of class, I really am reminding myself from a Benedictine tradition that there is nowhere that God is not,
Mm,
that everything is sacred and holy. And so just remembering that is how I start. And then I try to bring this openness or listening on multiple channels. So of course I'm listening for like what's the content and how are they, getting it, not getting it, that kind of thing. I'm also listening for the energy,
mm,
um, and just the engagement in class. And there will often be something that someone says that, like the other day, a student says, "I don't know how to," and I'm like, that grabbed my attention. That was like a sacred text.
mm,
And I wanted to affirm that because we're in the beginning weeks of the semester, and I wanted to affirm that students' willingness to be vulnerable
mm,
and to say that this is how we engage. Or sometimes there's more of a tense moment that happens. Like I had a student use humor that did jump off of the humor that was happening in the class, but the student was talking about previous racial violence
Mm,
um, during a time of lynchings in the U.S. and and I felt my stomach clench, and so that text
mm,
got my attention. I knew because I'd met with this student that the student was really struggling to understand these concepts of social construction, and because I had met with the student. And so I'm praying and reflecting on how can I acknowledge the impact of how the student shared that while also not shaming or putting the student down for doing it. And so I took a deep breath. I prayed for grace and responded with a both and. Yes, some things are lighthearted and playful, and at the same time,
mm,
racial violence has had horrific impacts and want to honor that too. And
mm.
so that's how I was kind of moving through using Lexio, even in those like moments that just really catch me off guard.
Mm. You're speaking of that incident with racial violence is a reminder that by nature of being in social work, you and your students confront the brokenness of the world and systemic injustice all the time. I mean, that's your text is the brokenness of the world, um, and systems that perpetuate that. How have you found that Lectio Divina, practicing that helps you not get your heart broken over and over, or at least maybe helps you put the pieces of your broken heart back together?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Because I really experience Lexio as being in conversation with God
Mhm,
and and of really listening in particular for how Jesus moved. There were many times when Jesus came and was present with the pain or suffering, and it was accompanying.
mhm,
So it wasn't always transforming or healing. And sometimes it was being with that suffering.
mhm,
And at the same time, there are moments in which Jesus really challenges and speaks truth to power, so to
mhm,
speak, to Pharisees, to scribes, to those who are righteous. And that's what we do in social work
mhm,
is for ourselves, for students, is helping them learn how to be with the pain, the crushing sadness at times, and to also learn tools for sussing out what's possible,
mhm,
what could be changed here. Is it with this one person, or is it working with a few others to do a little bit larger scale change?
mhm,
And so in the reflection and oratio, for me, it's God, what are you wanting me to see here about possibility?
mhm,
And then speaking that to the students.
mhm.
Um, that again, a both and.
Yeah, yeah. I love that part of Catholic tradition, the both and. It's so invitational. Um, I know from reading your pedagogical work that in general, you are a professor who who brings a very mindful practice into her classroom. And you talk to your students specifically about breathing and mindfulness. And I'm wondering, th- those are pretty accessible to anybody. But as a woman of faith, or just as a person who practices Lectio, are there any key distinctions that you might make between what you get personally from Lectio that that aren't quite as big a part of other mindfulness practices?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think what's in common is with all of these contemplative practices is helping me and others to be present and attentive I think for me, what draws me to Lectio is the relationality of it. It's so dialogic.
Mm-hmm.
And because I'm in social work, because there's so many challenges, that I really need to be in relationship with a God who cares and loves and is always present.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think for me, Lectio is um, is a sustaining, fruitful practice. And then I can pull out bits of that. So even with students, I will say, in addition to breathing or grounding, who cares about you? Is it a pet? Is it a loved one? Is it a friend? Can you call to mind that person's image and imagine them with you? And
Mm-hmm.
so I translate some of it into um, language that I can teach at a public university in my head. I have God in mind, and I have God's presence with me.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for making your practice so transparent for us. And I got lots of portable, stealable ideas, which is one of the things I love about these conversations. Um, was there anything about Lexio that I didn't give you a chance to talk about that you would like us to know about, either the practice itself or the impact on your teaching?
Hmm. You know, I think I'd say two things. One is that uh, my undergraduate college was College of St. Benedict, this Sisters of St. Benedict's Monastery in St. Joseph, Minnesota. They were such wise teachers for me. They were the ones who modeled and witnessed that there is nowhere that God is not.
Mm,
And so I just want to highlight that when I'm using Lexio, it's from that interpretive frame.
mm,
It is from that understanding of how God acts and moves in the world. And the other thing that it's really been helpful for me with is to just prioritize with my teaching that, the technology or the content or the what assignments coming up, those things can kind of feel and loom large. And Lexio just helps me prioritize. Yes, I want to make sure those things go well, but it's from a relationality of how God is present in all of the people in the room,
mhm,
that grounds me and helps me listen and respond.
mhm. Venerable women, venerable tradition, and it's clearly made an impact on your practice, and it's made you quite a venerable woman yourself. Been enjoying a conversation with Liz Keenan, professor of social work at Southern Connecticut State University, walking us through the ways that she uses Lectio Divina to prepare herself to be a really effective teacher and accompanier of her students. Thank you so much, Liz.
Thank you, Karen.
Bye for now.